Kupiansk has been quiet for months. Now, according to a new assessment, that quiet may be ending, even as a much bigger Russian offensive, one that has ground on for the better part of a year, appears to be running out of steam less than 100 miles away. That's the picture in the Institute for the Study of War's Russian Offensive Campaign Assessment, dated July 8, 2026. ISW is a Washington-based think tank that publishes a daily written assessment of the war in Ukraine. According to that report, Russian forces are apparently redirecting additional combat power toward the Kupiansk direction in Kharkiv Oblast in the northeast. At the same time, their long-running assault on the city of Pokrovsk in Donetsk Oblast to the south is showing signs of losing momentum. Two fronts, one army, and, according to this single assessment, a possible decision about where to spend what's left. Here's the real question this video is built around. Is this a genuine change in strategy? A Russian command deciding Pokrovsk isn't worth the cost anymore and looking for softer ground? Or is it something far less dramatic, a routine reinforcement that OSINT analysts are reading more into than the facts support? ISW itself isn't fully sure. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that uncertainty exists, what would have to happen for it to resolve, and what to actually watch for in the days ahead. Let's start with what's actually known, because the specifics matter more than the headline. Pokrovsk, a transport and logistics hub in western Donetsk Oblast, has been the focus of one of the longest and most costly Russian offensive efforts of the entire war. For months, Russian units have pushed toward and around the city, and Ukrainian forces have contested nearly every kilometer of approach. SW's ongoing tracking shows the pace of that assault has recently slowed, not stopped, but slowed in a way consistent with an offensive running into diminishing returns. SW doesn't say the Pokrovsk effort is over. It says the momentum has changed and that Russian advances there have become harder to sustain at the previous rate. At the same time, the same assessment reports a buildup of Russian combat power aimed at Kupiansk, a city in Kharkiv Oblast that has changed hands and come under renewed pressure at multiple points since the early phase of the full-scale invasion. ISW frames this as forces being directed toward or repositioned in support of operations in that direction. That phrasing is worth sitting with for a second, because directed toward is doing a lot of work in that sentence. It isn't the same as committed to a new offensive. It's closer to something is moving, analysts can see it moving, but they can't yet see where it ends up. This is where the story gets more complicated than Russia gave up on Pokrovsk and picked a new target. I spent some time this week going back through several consecutive days of ISW's published assessments leading up to July 8th, and one thing stood out. The Institute is unusually careful in this particular report to say what it doesn't know. It states explicitly that the scale and intent of the Kupiansk buildup remain unconfirmed. That's not a throwaway caveat. It's the whole ballgame. Here's the obstacle every analyst tracking this war runs into, worth explaining plainly because it shapes everything else in this video. Assessments like this one are built almost entirely from open-source material. Geolocated combat footage, satellite imagery, statements from Russian and Ukrainian military bloggers, official communiques from both governments, and terrain control mapping projects like Deep State, which open-source researchers use widely to track the front line in near real time. None of those sources are complete. None are fast. A convoy seen on video today might be a rotation of exhausted units, a genuine reinforcement, or nothing more than routine logistics. From a single clip, geolocated days after it was filmed, it can be almost impossible to tell which. So when ISW says Russia is opening a new push toward Kupiansk, what it actually means, more precisely, is this. The visible indicators, equipment movement, unit identification, reported contact along new stretches of the line, have crossed a threshold worth flagging, without yet crossing the threshold of certainty. That distinction is the entire reason this video exists instead of a 5-second headline. That's the limit of the evidence. But the report doesn't stop at raising a flag. It also lays out why, if the shift is real, it would matter enormously for how the rest of this war gets fought. That's the part almost nobody explains clearly. To understand why a second axis near Kupiansk would matter, you have to understand what a multi-front pressure strategy does to a defending army. Ukraine's ground forces, like any military fighting a defensive war along a line stretching over 1,000 kilometers, don't have unlimited reserves. Every brigade committed to reinforcing one sector is a brigade unavailable somewhere else. This is well documented, not speculative. Analysts have described Ukraine's reserve posture for much of this war as stretched thin, forced into constant trade-offs between shoring up the most threatened point on the map and holding enough of a cushion elsewhere to respond to a surprise. If Russian commanders are, in fact, probing for a second viable axis of advance after absorbing heavy losses around Pokrovsk, the logic is straightforward, even if it's uncomfortable. Force Ukraine to choose. Reinforce Kupiansk, and Pokrovsk's defenders get thinner. Reinforce Pokrovsk, and whatever is building near Kupiansk gets room to grow. ISW isn't predicting that this will happen. This is the strategic logic that would explain why the pattern matters if it holds up, which is a very different claim, and one worth keeping straight in your head as we go. So here's the second hook, because this is really where the video turns. The interesting question was never really, did Russia shift forces? Movement happens constantly in a war this size. The interesting question is whether this particular movement is a supporting effort, a distraction, a probe, a way to pin down Ukrainian reserves without any real intention of a major push, or whether it's the primary effort, a genuine change in where Russian command believes the war can actually be won this year. ISW's own assessment says, plainly, that it can't yet tell you which one this is. That admission is more honest and more useful than a confident answer would be. Here's the take that'll probably annoy people who follow this war closely on both sides of the online debate. Treating a single week's territorial control update as proof of a turning point in either direction is bad analysis, and it happens constantly. When Pokrovsk was advancing quickly, plenty of commentary called it the start of a Donbas collapse. Now that it's slowing and a second front is stirring, plenty of commentary calls it evidence Russia is flailing, unable to close out one offensive without opening another. Both takes might eventually be right. Neither is currently supported by what's actually in this report. SW's caveats exist for a reason, and skipping past them to reach a satisfying conclusion is exactly how bad information spreads about this war. What strikes me most, looking at this pattern rather than any single data point, is what it says about the state of the war itself, 17 months into this stretch of grinding, incremental fighting. Neither side seems able to force a decisive breakthrough on a single axis without paying a cost that makes the next axis harder to sustain. That's not a dramatic conclusion, but it's a genuinely important one, and it gets lost every time a single map update gets treated as the whole story. There's a second obstacle here, beyond just the video footage is old by the time anyone sees it. It's confirmation bias, running in both directions at once. Russian military bloggers have every incentive to describe repositioning as evidence of momentum. Ukrainian officials and sympathetic commentators have every incentive to describe a slowdown at Pokrovsk as evidence the offensive has failed outright. ISW's stated method for handling that is to wait for corroboration across multiple independent sources before treating something as confirmed rather than reported. That's exactly why this particular assessment reads the way it does. Cautious, hedged, unwilling to commit to a conclusion the evidence doesn't yet support. That caution is the product working as intended, not a failure to reach a verdict. So, genuine question, not a rhetorical one, because I actually want to know what you think. If you were reading these daily assessments yourself, how much weight would you put on a single week's reported shift before you believed it represented a real change in strategy? Would you wait for a second? Independent report to corroborate it? Or is one credible institute's caveat-laden update enough to change your own view of where this war is headed? There's no scoreboard that settles that argument tonight. What there is a status you can check for yourself, updated daily, by people whose entire job is separating the confirmed from the merely reported. So where does this actually stand, as of the date of this report? Pokrovsk remains contested, with Russian forces still present in and around the city and Ukrainian units still defending it, but with the rate of Russian advance assessed as reduced compared to recent months. Kupiansk, meanwhile, is described as an area where Russian forces are massing or redirecting effort without a confirmed major offensive launched at the scale of the Pokrovsk operation. Both statuses are snapshots, not endpoints, the kind of thing that can look completely different a week from now. That's precisely why ISW publishes an update like this one every single day rather than issuing a single verdict and moving on. One detail that stuck with me, going through this, ISW frames the Kupiansk buildup as something that could still be a supporting effort rather than a primary shift. That single sentence is arguably the most important line in the entire assessment, and the one most likely to get cut from any headline written about this story. A supporting effort and a primary offensive can look almost identical in their opening days. The same units moving, the same equipment showing up on geolocated footage, the same initial contact along new stretches of the line. The difference only becomes clear over time, as reinforcement either keeps building or tapers off. Which means the honest answer to what does this mean is not fully knowable yet, and anyone telling you otherwise is guessing. That's genuinely unsatisfying if what you wanted was a clean narrative. Russia winning, Russia losing, a breakthrough, a collapse. War reporting built on open-source assessment doesn't usually deliver clean narratives, and the ones that claim to are usually skipping the caveats that made the real report worth reading in the first place. What we can say, soberly, a long, costly Russian effort at Pokrovsk appears to be slowing. A second area of Russian activity near Kupiansk appears to be building. Whether those two facts are connected by a deliberate strategic choice or are simply two separate things happening to occur around the same time isn't yet confirmed by the evidence ISW has published, and the Institute says so explicitly in its own words. If you want to track how this resolves, the most reliable way isn't waiting for a single dramatic headline. It's watching how the next several days of daily assessments describe the Kupiansk buildup, whether the language shifts from unconfirmed and possible towards something firmer, or whether it quietly fades from the reporting the way plenty of reported buildups have before. There's a piece of this specific assessment we didn't have room to unpack fully here. The exact distinction ISW draws between a supporting effort and a shaping operation, and why analysts choose one term over the other. If you want us to break that down properly in a follow-up, drop a comment with the word AXS and we'll put it together. For now, go check the primary source yourself rather than taking our word or anyone else's for what it says. That habit alone will make you a sharper reader of everything you see written about this war going forward, including this video.